Over 100 people vanished without a single scream. No bodies, no graves, no answers. Only one word, carved into wood: CROATOAN. And to this day, no one knows what it truly means.
Imagine carving your own obituary on a rock while watching your family die. History calls it a hoax, but the details are too specific to be a lie. For over 4 centuries, the disappearance of the Roanoke colony has remained America's oldest mystery. We are told they simply vanished, leaving behind only the cryptic word CROATOAN. But what if they left something else? What if the silence of history was actually broken by a scream carved in stone? A scream that details a massacre so brutal, the world chose to believe it was fake rather than face the bloody truth.
The year is 1937. The place is a swampy, mosquito-infested stretch near the Chowan River in North Carolina. A tourist named Lewis Hammond is navigating the dense undergrowth when his boot strikes something hard. It isn't just debris. It is a large slab of quartz, heavy and strangely shaped. As he brushes away the centuries of moss and black mud, strange markings begin to emerge. These aren't natural formations. They are letters. Crude, desperate letters, etched with an archaic precision that sends a chill down his spine.
Hammond brings the stone to Emory University, where it falls under the scrutiny of Dr. Haywood Pierce, Jr. The inscription is legible, but the message is horrifying. It is signed by Eleanor Dare, the daughter of the colony's governor and mother to Virginia Dare, the first English child born in America. The text doesn't speak of assimilation or peace. It speaks of death. It claims that her husband, Ananias, and her daughter, Virginia, went hence unto heaven in 1591. The stone was a tombstone for a lost civilization.
The reverse side of the stone tells a story that nightmares are made of. It details misery and war. It describes a savage attack by savages, a term used in the parlance of the time, where nearly all the settlers were slaughtered. Only 7 survived. The inscription paints a picture of chaos, arrows flying through the mist, the smell of burning timber, and the screams of the dying echoing through the primordial forest. This was not a peaceful integration into a local tribe. This was an extermination event.
When the discovery was announced, the world listened. Historians were electrified. The relentless specificity of the Elizabethan English used on the stone baffled skeptics. The spelling, the syntax, the use of specific archaic characters, it was perfect. Too perfect, perhaps. Dr. Pierce and other scholars at Emory put their reputations on the line, declaring the stone authentic. For a brief moment, the mystery of Roanoke was considered solved. The settlers hadn't vanished, they had been hunted down. But then, the story took a turn that would doom the credibility of the first stone. A reward was offered for more information. Suddenly, stones began to appear everywhere. Not just 1 or 2, but nearly 50 of them, tracing a path from North Carolina all the way to Georgia. These new stones were found by local farmers and stonecutters who conveniently stumbled upon them just as the cash rewards were announced. The narrative became convoluted, the handwriting inconsistent. The miraculous discovery was turning into a circus.
Investigative journalists began to dig into the finders of these new stones. They uncovered a ring of opportunists, seemingly led by a stonecutter named Bill Eberhart. Evidence mounted that these men were forging stones using textbooks to mimic the language, driven purely by greed. The inconsistencies were glaring. Some stones used words that didn't exist in the 16th century. Others bore the marks of modern tools. The sheer volume of the find became its undoing. The Dare stones were branded a magnificent, elaborate fraud.
In 1941, the Saturday Evening Post published an exposé by journalist Boyce House. He dismantled the credibility of the stones, painting the entire affair as a shameful scam preying on history. The public felt betrayed. The academic community, embarrassed by their initial enthusiasm, retreated into silence. The narrative was set. The Dare stones were fake. All of them. The baby fell out with the bathwater, and the stones were relegated to the basements of museums, treated as embarrassing curiosities rather than historical artifacts.
For decades, the stones gathered dust in the dark recesses of Roanoke University. They became a punchline, a cautionary tale for historians. To suggest they might be real was career suicide. The tragic story carved into the quartz, the death of Ananias, the slaughter of the colonists, was silenced once again. But history has a way of refusing to stay buried. In the quiet dark of the archive, the first stone, the one found by Hammond before the reward money, before the media circus, sat apart, waiting.
Decades later, brave historians and geologists began to take a second look. They noticed a crucial distinction that the 1941 exposé ignored. The first stone, the Hammond stone, was fundamentally different from the others. The moss growth in the grooves suggested it had been exposed to the elements for centuries, not weeks. The weathering was consistent with a 300-year timeline. While the subsequent 47 stones were almost certainly forgeries created for profit, the first stone defied easy explanation.
Linguistic analysis brought even more disturbing clarity. The inscription on the first stone used strictly Elizabethan spelling and syntax, including distinct colloquialisms that would have been incredibly difficult for a 1930s fraudster to replicate perfectly without the internet or specialized libraries. It correctly used initials for names in a way consistent with 16th-century gravestones. If this was a hoax, it was perpetrated by a genius scholar of Tudor English who sought no fame and no money, as Hammond never tried to sell the stone initially. Why would such a find be dismissed so aggressively? Conspiracy theorists and revisionist historians suggest a darker motive. The story on the stone of a massacre by natives contradicted the romanticized version of the Lost Colony that had become a tourist staple. Furthermore, acknowledging the stone means acknowledging a gruesome failure of the English Empire. It is easier to sell a mystery of mystical disappearance than a gritty, bloody reality of starvation, war, and execution in the swamps.
Consider the psychology of the artifact. The message is not a treasure map. It is not a claim to land. It is a plea. Father, we die here. It is the work of a woman, Eleanor Dare, watching her world collapse. The sheer emotional weight of the inscription, asking her father to convey her soul to God, feels too raw, too intimate, to be the work of a Depression-era scammer. It resonates with the trauma of a mother who knows she is the last of her kind. If the first Dare stone is real, it rewrites the history of early America. It changes the narrative from a mystical disappearance to a concrete tragedy of violence and abandonment. It suggests that the settlers didn't just merge with the tribes peacefully. They were caught in a geopolitical war they didn't understand, and they paid for it with their lives. The stone stands as a testament to the final, terrifying days,
a message in a bottle cast into the sea of time, hoping someone, anyone, would remember them.
Today, Roanoke University still holds the stones. Science has yet to definitively prove the first stone is a fake, just as it cannot fully prove it is real. It remains in a gray zone of history, a damned artifact. So we are left with a haunting choice. Either a simple tourist in 1937 pulled off the greatest linguistic forgery in history, or that rock really was held by the trembling hands of Eleanor Dare, carving her final goodbye while the shadows closed in. Which story scares you more?